when my daughter turns 18, which is a long time from now, although she doesn't think so. Yeah, she thinks it's probably next year in her mind. But when this happens and she wakes up that morning of her 18th birthday, do you know what's going to be on her nightstand waiting for her? I'll tell you. It's power of attorney documents. And if she wants anything else for her birthday that year, maybe to even leave the house, if I can probably prevent that, she's signing those documents. She doesn't need to appoint me or her mother. I don't know if Carrie would agree with that or not, but
no, that's a different discussion.
She doesn't need to appoint us, but she needs to appoint somebody.
Yeah.
Right.
Welcome to Critical Thinking Required, hosted by LBW. This podcast is intended for free thinkers, entrepreneurs, and knowledge seekers. Join us as we discuss relevant financial topics, explore with guests their financial journeys, and engage with experts in industries such as space, media and entertainment, real estate, and many more. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Welcome to Critical Thinking Required. I'm your host today, Kennedy, and I'm back again with Dan, who I hope you recognize. And today we're going to talk about estate planning, specifically 10 simple-ish things for estate planning that you can consider. It's kind of a big topic, so we're going to break it down into a top 10. Sound good, Dan?
Yep.
Before we get into it, of course, Ying will remind us, you got to check us out on all of our social media. You can find our podcasts on Apple Music, on YouTube, on Spotify. Watch some more. All right, so the first thing to consider, we've said it before, we'll say it again. No cost estate planning documents. What do we mean by that, Dan?
They do exist. So there are documents.
Mm-hmm.
We have found them. We keep them on file for any state that we have clients in, which I think is like 26 states or so. You can find a number of the documents you would typically address with estate planning through various different sites online.
Usually like the actual state websites, like they're often there. So if you Google your state and then, I don't know, power of attorney form, power of healthcare form, you're probably going to find your state's version. But an easier, better way to do that, email us. We'll send it to you. It's no problem. We have them all anyway. So.
Yeah, the Department of Health for Wisconsin holds a lot of these documents. That's true actually in a lot of states. But typically speaking, like I said, power of attorney forms, which we may touch on again later, but really for most people, that and guardianship issues are probably the most essential. Power of attorney stuff, you're still alive, so it's really important that you have that in play. But wills, typically power of attorney forms, a healthcare directive, which is also known as living will, or maybe commonly known as the pull the plug document. Like, I don't know why these all have these same words for the same thing, just to confuse you, but they're out there. Mm-hmm. And often we can find like a burial form for most states too. Understand that like these are not.
They're not exhaustive.
No.
Pretty simple, but
they are.
They'll work for a lot of people.
And we really think that this stuff should be addressed in a customized fashion, where you go see a specific estate planning attorney that has done this, does this, it's their competency, and you work with them on it. But if you've got nothing in play, and about half of Americans have nothing in play, then if nothing else, consider this a stopgap until you're ready to financially pay for and consider building a custom plan. Is better than not having anything in play.
And I mean, you did kind of mention a part that leads us into our number 2, Dan. A lot of you out there have kids. What's going to happen to those kids? Or even more of you out there like me have pets. What's going to happen to Apple and Turnip? That's my cats. What's going to happen to them if I were to just fall off a cliff tomorrow? You know?
Yeah.
You got to figure that out. Yeah.
Living creatures.
Yeah. Granted, the kids kind of may rank a little bit higher than the pets, but you know. Yeah.
Let's look at your pets. They're
very cute.
Right. They often don't get thought about as much compared to the kids, right?
Sure.
If you don't think about the kids, child services gets involved. You don't think about the pets. That doesn't happen.
They go to the pound.
They go to the pound, which is awful.
It is awful.
A lot of times estate planning is a very dark conversation. We got there real quick.
Oh yeah, sorry.
But this is truly a hard conversation to have. If we were to kind of tune into the kid part of it, it's usually when we talk about estate planning, the two most difficult things for someone to consider is trustee, if we're talking about trusts, and in this guardianship issue. So there's a lot of factors that go into play. What is the religious, spiritual, political beliefs of these parents that are going to be stepping in and taking this role, which no one's going to do it like you would want it to be done.
Sure, absolutely.
And that makes it hard, right?
Yeah.
To even think about this emotional concept. But who's going to be most similar to as many of these as you possibly can? You also got to think about location. So do you want your children to live elsewhere? That's a completely different experience.
Yeah.
What is the couple like? Do they have children of their own? Is it not a couple? Is it one individual? Is it a parent, which maybe sounds great now, but 10 years from now, maybe they're 75 years old, and that's kind of tough. So with Guardian, really put some thought, and of course, as we'll probably mention too, talk to these people about it before you name them.
Yeah, they should probably know they're going to be taking care of your kids before it's time for them to take care of your kids.
Right.
They might be cursing your grave at that point.
They might feel like it is the case, and they might change their mind. So the other thing to think about here too is having backups.
Yeah.
At least 2 backups, if not 3, to name. And what we see a lot of people do is they'll name multiple people as a guardian. So maybe if it is a couple, you're naming the couple. That's fine. Obviously, the elephant in the room there is, what if the couple is no longer together? Yeah, so do you just name one, or do you name a couple but then specify if something happens that the one person takes priority in raising those children compared to the other? So there's a number of ways to do it. There's not a right or wrong.
Yeah, whichever way you do it, the point is that you have a plan to do it, that you have a plan in place. So,
do you know who's going to take care of your cats?
Maybe I'll talk to my girlfriend about that. I don't know, my best friend. I'll figure it out. I really should figure it out now. Dan is right. I'll consider who's going to take care of Apple and Turnip. You can put some pictures. Apple and Turnip. And I think something you mentioned in guardianship as well is trustees. So should you consider, is a trust going to be right for you? That's number 3 on our list, I think.
Yeah.
There's a lot that goes in there. I think we recently had a podcast where we went into trustees a little bit. So go watch that one too.
We could be here all day just talking about this, like the simple-ish things to consider.
Yeah.
I don't know if this really qualifies as simple-ish.
We're going to make it simple-ish. We're trying to make it simple-ish.
We're gonna try to do that. Is trust planning right for you or not? There's hundreds of different kinds of trusts, so it really depends on what we're trying to achieve. What are you trying to establish that trust for, though?
Yeah.
If it's a revocable living trust, are you doing that to have some control over assets as to who, when, how they go to people? Are you doing it because you recognize that avoids the probate courts and you don't want your money tied up or have that kind of issue at play while people are dealing with their emotional concerns over the passing of somebody?
Right.
Are you doing it because it is a minimization of costs?
Mm-hmm.
Are you thinking about doing trust planning because you're trying to protect assets, of which case you're talking about an entirely different trust? So these are really great things to talk about at some point, whether or not it makes sense for you. It doesn't for everybody, but a lot of times it does make sense, and it's just simply not discussed. And there really aren't documents out here to do this at no cost due to the high level of customization. So this is a case where you should be talking to your financial professionals and, of course, an estate planning attorney together, not in isolation, to see what this would look like for you.
Communication is important.
That it is. That it is.
I think as well, next on this list, for me at least, is burial instructions. Some people don't care about this. They're like, toss me in a box, shove me in the ground. I do not give a hoot. Some people it's a lot more important for. So I think you need to figure out, where do you lie on that scale? For me, I have some important preferences about my burial. I have some specific things I would want. But maybe for Dan, he's more of a toss me in the basement. I'll be fine.
Yeah, you're right, Kennedy. And it's also not just like most estate planning pieces. It's not really about you. So even if you don't give a damn as to what happens to you because you're dead, we get that comment a lot, it doesn't mean that everybody feels the same way.
Yeah.
So you may not care if you're cremated or buried, but someone else might have some really big feelings on what that actually looks like. There may be people who disagree about what happens to you. Um, there is power in this document. It typically, again, is one of the documents that we often do find at no cost through different sites. It could be provided also by a funeral home, which may or may not make sense to engage into conversation with on pre-planning items. But this really can make a big difference.
Right.
I'll share a personal example that I do often talk about with clients when we talk about this document. This document is usually formed after everything else is done, so people typically forget about it and don't realize how important it actually can be. So in my family, when my father became ill and eventually passed away within a year later of that, this is really the only document that he actually put a lot of thought into from the estate planning standpoint, and formalized and notarized and had a copy of it, of which when he became ill, I was his power of attorney and as executor of his estate, and therefore I had a copy of this document. Well, to make a long story very short, he ended up getting married during this time period in the nursing home, and as a result of that, his then new wife pretty much separated from his staff, his coworkers of 20 years, and his family. And then when he did eventually die, although he had this document completed that said he wanted a Jewish burial at a specific cemetery in Chicago in a private ceremony, what he actually received from his wife at that time was a public ceremony in a barn in Wisconsin, open casket, and then was to be cremated after that. Regardless on my viewpoints as his son or his former executor to his estate, or anyone else's viewpoints, that's his wish. Now, I can tell you, and this is the case, different states have different strengths here from a prioritization between what people want to see done. In this case, as his son, not his spouse, I didn't have a lot of rights. But what I did have is this document, of which case I presented to the funeral home and said, if you continue with this process, we're going to give this document to every Jewish organization in a 50-mile radius. And I'll tell you, my father got buried in that Chicago cemetery that he originally wanted. So even if you don't foresee issues coming up, they could be as little as someone really doesn't feel comfortable about the flowers that you've chosen, or the poem or Bible verse or song or dance, which is important to some people. It could be something more significant, like I experienced with my siblings and my father's situation. So again, these can be bigger issues later than what they look like now. So put some thought to it.
That really drove the point home, didn't it? I didn't know that story either. We all learned something new about. I didn't know about that story. Oh wow. Yeah, that's a great example. Do your burial documents if you care.
Yeah, or if you think someone else might care, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
The burying part, there's usually some end of life instructions.
Right.
That's number 5 on our list.
Yeah.
And this is what we kind of colloquially know as the pull the plug document or not. So what do you want happen? What do you want to happen if you are in this situation where you're on a ventilator or whatever it may be, you're in a vegetative state, whatever. What do you want to happen? Do you have a timeline? Like, what's going to go on about that?
Well, a lot of times when we get to the stage of life, it's not black and white. So planning for that's really difficult.
Yeah.
In a lot of these documents that the state will provide, and in fact that attorneys will even recommend often, are very simple design documents. It's usually something like, if I'm in a persistent vegetated state, a coma, if I am in need of life-sustaining measures like a ventilator or a feeding tube, if I'm terminally ill. And so it just, again, like Candy's saying, you don't just get there. So a lot of times there might be a desire or a need to have something that's a bit more extravagant from an instruction standpoint than this. And the flip side of that, though, too, is that it gets complicated, and then you end up sometimes getting tied up with legal issues or people's feelings. And actually, I think that's something to consider too, kind of like the burial concept. It's not just kind of your feelings on this; it's also other people's feelings that are going to come into play. So you don't have to do one of these documents. You can leave a lot of this discretion to your power of attorney for healthcare,
As long as
or
you do that document.
as long as you do that, that's great point. Or you can spell it out in this living will, this advance directive, and then your power of attorney and so on they will just have to follow what your instructions happen to be. Some people don't like that because they want that power of attorney, and others to have input and to assess the situation, the gray in the situation. Sometimes they don't want that because they will see it as a burden on that person making the call for end of life. And sometimes they want it because they're worried that person's going to screw it up, get influenced, right?
Yeah.
Not be able to handle the situation when they get. And I know you've experienced a lot of this stuff too. That it's just this is probably is trying of a time compared to anything else, right? You know what's about to happen, and it's very difficult to handle it.
Yeah. Something else to number 6 on our list is power of attorneys, power of healthcare. And these can, I think, oftentimes in marriage, people assume that their partner, their spouse, is automatically power of attorney, power of healthcare. Is that true, Dan?
Yeah, that's a dangerous assumption to make. A lot of cases in this, because first of all, your spouse doesn't have to be your power of attorney. You can list somebody else if you so choose to.
Mm-hmm.
So it shouldn't be just an assumption that that person has that right.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have these documents, what you need to know about that is likely this means that you're going to have to get guardianship.
Mm-hmm.
Apply to the courts for guardianship, which is not an easy process. It's not a comfortable process. It's also not one that's easy to unwind. So although a lot of times, and I don't know how true it is or not, when a person is in need of, which we could talk about, in need of a power of attorney to step in, they very well likely may not come out of that situation, but they might. And so if they come out of that situation and you had to approach this from a guardianship standpoint, now how do you unwind that situation for this person who is now competent again, which we'll touch on.
Mm-hmm.
But that's messy. You should know that a power of attorney that we feel is probably, we mentioned earlier, maybe the most important document here, with maybe the exception of guardian, to really address here, because in this situation, you are still alive. And so someone's got to be there to take care of these issues. Power of attorney in a springing capacity, there's a non-springing and there's a springing capacity, which is referring to an event that needs to happen in order for this person to step in. This person's called your agent. That's the terminology used for your power of attorney. For your agent to step in and take care of these matters, this person needs to either have an event or not.
That's springing.
That's springing if an event occurs. That event is going to be some degree of, usually 2 physicians, right, deeming that person to be incapacitated, incompetent. And at that point, the agent can step in and start making decisions, whether they're the power of attorney for healthcare or finances, that deal with those specific matters. But there's also a non-springing, which doesn't require an event to occur for someone to step in. That gets signed, and that person automatically is able to do something on someone else's behalf. And there's no right or wrong way. It's really a matter of comfortability and utilization. So it might be a situation where you have a couple, or maybe it isn't a couple, you have an arrangement where somebody is traveling all the time, but maybe closing for, let's say, on real estate deals all the time, and therefore it's difficult for them to go to closing. So having a non-springing power of attorney that can sign these things is really beneficial. Or the one that we probably get way more than that is someone might have a mistrust or uncomfortability with allowing for the situation to only get enacted if 2 physicians will deem someone incompetent, which is a liability on those physicians, and therefore it's not always an easy thing to do. So not having a document that requires that doesn't put that concept even in play. And again, on the flip side, this is a very vulnerable thing to do and therefore uncomfortable. And so a lot of people just don't want to have that non-springing fact. In fact, we see springing power of attorneys just outweigh significantly non-springing power of attorneys.
Yeah. So, I mean, you got to decide.
Yes.
Get them in place.
Yeah. The last thing I'll add on this too, as to how important this is, and I joke about this all the time when we have these much larger discussions about this, but I'm actually not joking. I'm dead serious that this is going to happen. So when my daughter turns 18, which is a long time from now, although she doesn't think so. Yeah, she thinks it's probably next year in her mind. But when this happens and she wakes up that morning of her 18th birthday, do you know what's going to be on her nightstand waiting for her? I'll tell you. It's power of attorney documents. And if she wants anything else for her birthday that year, maybe to even leave the house, if I can probably prevent that, she's signing those documents. She doesn't need to appoint me or her mother. I don't know if Carrie would agree with that or not, but
no, that's a different discussion.
She doesn't need to appoint us, but she needs to appoint somebody.
Yeah.
Right. Because, she or your child goes away to school at 18, you as the parent, you don't have any other say. It's not, you can't be checking up on your child or making these decisions. And I don't know about you, but going to college often means some decisions that are not well thought out. And so be great to have this done before then. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point, Dan. I think next on our list is asset distribution, if we're going along the lines of the whole kid thing. So I guess you don't have to give your assets to your kids. That's a question. Who's getting your assets? Are they equal? Is it equitable? Are you donating them to charity? What's going to happen? When? With what conditions? Something you should probably figure out.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. There's a lot of ways to draft this out.
Mm-hmm.
It can change over time. It probably will change over time. But I think some thought needs to come into play. It's very rare. And unfortunately, we've seen this happen a few times where parents pass prematurely and leave assets to minor kids. Kids turn 18. It's been very rare that we've seen 18-year-olds come into a lot of money and make great decisions with it. We always say kind of tends to seem to kind of go to a sports car, and that sports car doesn't live that long. So it's just, your mind's still maturing well into your mid 20s. You might, you might want to basically for your heirs, just list out a couple things so that these are not situations where it actually puts these heirs in worse off places.
Yeah.
That's not your intention. We recognize that.
I think specifically as a personal example, for my family has it in their will that I don't get anything until I have a college degree, check, and I'm 25, check. So yeah, pass. So those are some pretty common just conditions to put in place in terms of assets.
Yeah.
If we're using my personal example.
Number 8 is fun.
Number 8 is fun. It kind of goes along the same lines, but I feel like it's unique in itself, is the knickknacks. Who's getting grandma's necklace? What about that painting and the den over the fireplace that I've been looking at for years? Who gets that? What about that 100-year-old family tree that great grandma planted back in the day and that's been around all these years? Who the heck gets that tree? We're not going to cut it up probably. So I think that these tend to be the things that people care a little bit more about usually than just the money amount. It's the stuff that holds the emotional connections, the feelings, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're a sentimental fool like me, you're gonna have a ton of these things to do, and Kennedy as well too. And I think that's kind of these are the things that actually do matter.
That's what I hear about. Yeah.
Most times the case. In my family, this was like my great grandmother's necklace, which I don't know had any monetary value whatsoever, but she wore it every day of her life for I don't know how many decades. So she had 2 daughters who unfortunately didn't get along in the later years of my great grandmother's life. So they actually shipped this necklace back and forth and fought about doing so every year for about a decade. And it just, I know that my great grandmother would not have appreciated that, and probably wouldn't have left it to either one of them if that were the case. So, yeah, these are the things people argue about. It's the burial stuff that we see, and it's not usually the money, because the money is hopefully so well dictated and structured out that it's not in question. But this stuff,
the feelings people really care about.
Yeah. What happened to the necklace in the end?
Well, my grandmother lived longer than her sister, so she got that, and honestly, I don't even know where it is at this point.
Sometimes that happens too.
Yeah. Typically dealt with a document that goes by several different names, but basically it's a tangible inventory list that you create, likely would get signed and notarized, and this allows you to write in and out people all the time. It's sometimes people say, like, my grandparents put stickers on the name of, sure, I get that too. This is just a bit more formal and cleaner way to handle the situation.
And then you have a little paper that says, no, grandma said, I get the tree. It's right here. But then this kind of goes into, so you've written all this stuff. Like, you have all of these documents. Where are the documents? Who knows where the documents are? Did you tell anyone? Are you like me? Did you put the documents in a really specific place so you'd never forget where they were, and then you didn't tell anyone? Or you forgot where they were, which is what I do.
Yeah.
So this is also really important because, it's great that you've done all this stuff, but they got to actually be available when the time comes. So I think it's helpful to have a couple people know where they are. You could give copies to your financial advisors.
We always recommend that.
Yeah.
Most states don't have like a system to keep these on file.
Yeah.
So it's really your responsibility to do that. And we mentioned earlier, it's really important to tell people that you're going to list them. Well, not even just tell them, like maybe have a conversation about it. That they know ahead of time, like, I'm going to do this job, and will they do this job? Know that obviously can change. And but yeah, you can't expect the plan to play out if you don't ever actually lay it out for people.
Or tell anyone the plan.
That's kind of important too. I know now they have like cute little document organizers on Amazon or whatever, where you can have everything in place, but then you just got to tell people where those are. So, and then last but not least, number 10 on our list, routine review. If you make I'm 25, if I were to make this now and then not address it for 20 years, 45-year-old Kennedy might feel a little bit differently than 25-year-old Kennedy does right now. So it's, even if it's not like an annual review, a semi-annual review, something like that, because your feelings might change. People change.
Yeah. I'm definitely older than 25. And I know it's changed for me, from time to time too. So this seems like it's probably the easiest thing on our list, but it doesn't happen as often as it should, right? This is not a topic that most people jump up to do.
Not the most comfy. It's kind of like not great talking about death. And not that all of estate planning is talking about death, but it does feel that way when people hear estate planning. But it's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. It's not the most comfortable thing, but it's important. And if you deal with it now, the people who love you won't have to deal with it later.
Okay,
Drop mic.
Good job. That's really what you're doing this for.
Like and subscribe.
Thank you for taking the time to start your journey of thinking differently and listening to LBW talk about stuff they love. Until next time.